There is a very uncomfortable feeling when someone disrespects you, but you know that if you react immediately, things may only become worse. You want to say something back. You want to explain. You want them to understand that you do not deserve to be treated that way. And that is completely normal, because no one wants to be dismissed. No one wants to be spoken to with disrespect. And no one wants to stay silent when their heart feels hurt. But the problem is, reacting immediately does not always help you regain respect. Sometimes it only pulls you into the same chaos that the other person is creating. You begin saying things you do not truly want to say. You begin speaking louder, becoming more defensive, more tense. And later, when everything has passed, you ask yourself, why couldn't I stay calmer in that moment? People with high emotional intelligence are not people who never feel pain. They are not people who never feel anger. And they are not people who always know how to react perfectly. They are still human. They still get hurt. They still feel uncomfortable. They still have moments when a part of them deeply wants to respond back. But they have learned something very important. When someone disrespects you, the hardest thing is not responding sharply. It is not allowing that disrespect to turn you into someone you may later regret becoming. The Stoics understood this deeply. Calmness is not weakness. Kindness is not submission. And staying silent for a moment does not mean you have lost. Sometimes it is how you protect your dignity before your emotions speak for you. Today, we are going to explore how people with high emotional intelligence handle disrespect without becoming cold, without becoming harsh, and without losing their inner peace. Not to win every argument, not to make others fear you, but to help you stay calm, clear, and grounded, even when someone else cannot keep their calm. There is one principle in this video that may help you change the way you respond whenever you are treated with disrespect. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to respond immediately. It is to pause for a moment so you do not lose yourself. And the first thing an emotionally mature person learns is not to let their first reaction decide the entire story. Because when you are disrespected, what you want to say in that moment may not be what you still believe is right once you have calmed down. One of the clearest signs of emotional intelligence is the ability to pause before reacting. Not because you do not have emotions, and not because you do not feel pain, but because you understand that the first emotion that rises inside you is not always the emotion that should be spoken immediately. When someone disrespects them, most people react very quickly. Just one hurtful sentence, one dismissive look, one attitude that makes them feel looked down on can be enough to make their emotions start rising inside. You want to respond right away. You want to defend yourself. You want to tell the other person that they have no right to treat you that way. And that is completely normal, because everyone wants to be respected. Everyone wants to be treated fairly. Everyone wants to feel that their value is not being dismissed by someone else. But if you react immediately in that moment, it becomes very easy for your emotions to speak for you. You may speak louder than you wanted to, say something heavier than you intended, or say things that later, when you are calm again, make you wonder why you said them at all. People with high emotional intelligence are not always naturally calm. They also get angry sometimes. They also feel hurt. They also have moments when a part of them deeply wants to respond back. But they have learned how to pause for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough to breathe. Long enough to look at what is really happening. Long enough to ask themselves, if I say this right now, will I still respect myself afterward? That pause matters deeply, because in the moment you pause, you begin taking back your power to choose. You can choose to speak, choose to stay silent, choose to walk away, or choose to respond in a calmer way. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that what we can truly control is not how other people behave, but how we hold our mind in response to it. And the more you mature, the more clearly you understand this. You cannot control whether someone disrespects you, but you can decide whether you will allow that disrespect to pull you out of your calm. That is a very important difference. A person who reacts immediately often lets emotion lead the way, but a person who knows how to pause is giving themselves a chance to respond with clarity. And that alone makes them more grounded. Not because they do not get hurt, but because they do not allow that hurt to decide who they become in the next moment. But learning to pause before reacting is only the first step. Because even when you do not respond immediately, someone else's words can still make you question yourself. And that is when you need to remember, the way someone treats you does not determine your worth. The way you see and value yourself does. One of the most exhausting things for a person is believing that the way others behave always says something about their worth. Someone speaks to you coldly, and you begin asking yourself, did I do something wrong? Someone disrespects you, and you begin thinking, am I not valuable enough? Someone acts unpleasantly, and you carry their attitude into your heart as if it must be your fault. This can happen very easily, because when people are treated poorly, their first reaction is often to turn inward and start doubting themselves. But people with high emotional intelligence usually look at things a little more slowly. They understand that the way someone treats you does not always reflect who you are. Sometimes it reflects their own inner state. A person who is exhausted may speak more harshly than usual. A person who feels insecure may try to make others feel smaller. A person carrying a lot of chaos inside may bring that chaos into the way they speak to you. That does not mean you have to accept disrespectful behavior, and it does not mean you have to tolerate everything. But it helps you understand something very important. Not every emotion from someone else needs to become a burden in your heart. Not every hurtful word deserves to become a measure of your worth. And not every act of disrespect has the right to make you doubt who you are. This is a very important distinction. You can see someone's behavior. You can recognize that it is not appropriate. You can set boundaries if needed. But you do not need to turn it into proof that you are not good enough. Epictetus once reminded us that what hurts people is often not the event itself, but the way they see that event. And in moments when you are being disrespected, the way you see the situation can decide whether or not you keep your calm. If you think, this person is acting this way because I am not valuable enough, you will be hurt much more deeply. But if you understand that the way they behave says more about their state of mind than it does about my worth, You create more space to stay calm. You do not need to absorb all of their emotions. You do not need to carry their frustration home with you. You do not need to let one disrespectful moment define your entire day. That is how emotionally mature people protect their peace. Not by pretending that nothing affects them, but by understanding clearly what belongs to them and what should be returned to the person who brought it. Because sometimes calmness begins with one very simple sentence. The way they behave does not necessarily define my worth. When you no longer allow someone else's disrespect to make you question yourself, you also begin to see things more clearly. You understand what should simply be allowed to pass. But you also understand that some behavior needs a clear response. This is not something you're willing to accept. A calm person does not mean someone who lets everything pass as if nothing happened. They may not raise their voice. They may not react harshly. They may not make things more tense than they already are. But when something crosses a line, they still know how to speak clearly. And that is very important, because many people misunderstand calmness. They think that if they are calm, they have to silently tolerate everything. Let things go. Pretend they are okay. Keep smiling, even when deep inside they are really not okay. But that is not healthy calmness. That is suppression. And if you suppress things for too long one day, they will turn into exhaustion, hurt, or an anger you may not even be able to control. People with high emotional intelligence do not choose that path. They do not let disrespect quietly build up inside their heart. They do not pretend that everything is fine when they are hurting inside. But they also do not need to explode for others to understand. They simply speak clearly, briefly, calmly, and respectfully enough. For example, when someone keeps interrupting, they may say, "Let me finish this thought first." When someone speaks with an inappropriate attitude, they may say, "I'm willing to continue this conversation, but not in this way." When a conversation starts becoming tense, they may say, "I think we should pause for a moment and continue when we are both calmer." Those sentences are not overly sharp. They do not embarrass anyone. They are not trying to win, but they are very clear. And that clarity often carries far more weight than an angry reaction. Because when you clearly communicate what you will not accept, while still keeping your calm, people can feel that. You are not easily pulled into chaos, but you are also not someone without boundaries. That is a very rare balance. You do not need to make everything a big issue, but you also do not need to make your feelings smaller. You do not need to attack anyone, but you also do not need to accept behavior that hurts you. The Stoics understood that self-control does not mean staying silent forever. It means knowing when to be silent, when to speak, and when to speak clearly, without letting anger lead the way. Sometimes a calm boundary can change the entire atmosphere. It does not say, "I want to win against you." It simply says, "I still respect you, but I also respect myself." And when someone can say that with calmness, they are not only protecting their own peace, they are also teaching others how to enter their life with more respect. But clearly expressing your boundaries does not mean you have to turn every conversation into an argument that continues until the very end. Sometimes you have already been clear enough. You have already remained respectful enough. And what matters next is not trying to win, but knowing when to stop before things become even heavier. Some arguments begin as something very small, a simple disagreement, a different point of view, a sentence that was not understood correctly. But if we are not careful, it can easily turn into a battle of ego. Everyone wants to be right. Everyone wants to be acknowledged. Everyone wants the other person to understand that. They are the one who sees the situation more clearly. And then the conversation is no longer about understanding each other. It becomes about winning and losing. This happens very easily because when someone disagrees with us, many people feel as if they themselves are being rejected. They do not just hear a different opinion. They feel like their value has been touched. And when the ego is touched, people often begin to talk more, become more tense, and find it harder to listen. But people with high emotional intelligence usually see disagreement in a different way. They understand that not everyone who thinks differently is against them. Not every conversation needs to end with someone admitting they were wrong. And winning an argument does not always mean you have truly kept your peace. Sometimes you can win with your words, but lose the lightness in your heart. You can prove that you are right, but make the conversation feel more distant. You can make the other person go silent, but that does not mean they understand you any better. That is why calm people often choose clarity instead of only trying to win. They still have their own opinions. They still know how to say what they think. They can still explain themselves clearly, but they do not turn every disagreement into a competition to protect their ego. When they need to speak, they speak. When they need to explain, they explain. But when they realize the conversation is no longer helping anyone understand each other better, they know how to stop, not because they lost, but because they understand that peace is sometimes more important than having one final sentence. The Stoics understood this deeply. You cannot control whether other people agree with you, and you cannot force someone to see life through your eyes. But you can control how you behave. When agreement does not come, you can still stay calm, still remain respectful, still keep your self-respect, and still walk away from an argument without carrying anger inside your heart. That is a very difficult kind of maturity, because everyone wants to be understood. Everyone wants their perspective to be acknowledged. Everyone wants others to see what they are seeing, but not everyone is calm enough to accept that some people will not understand them in that moment, and maybe they may never understand in the way we hope they would. When you can accept that, your mind begins to feel lighter. You no longer need to drag every conversation to the end. You no longer need to prove yourself to everyone. You no longer need to turn every difference into a battle. You only need to speak clearly enough, live honestly enough, keep your kindness, and allow time to prove the things that arguments cannot prove right away. Because sometimes a truly grounded person is not the one who wins every argument. It is the one who can still keep their calm, even when no one is willing to see things their way. However, choosing not to keep arguing until the very end does not mean you are weak. And staying calm does not mean other people can treat you however they want. A truly mature person can still be kind while also knowing how to protect their self-respect. Many people misunderstand kindness. They think that if they are kind, They must always let things go. Always tolerate. Always smile. Always keep the peace, even when they are not okay inside. And some people also believe that if they want to be respected, they have to become harder, colder, less approachable, even harsher. But people with high emotional intelligence understand that life does not only offer those two choices. You do not need to become cold just to stop others from crossing your boundaries. And you do not need to tolerate everything just to keep the image of being a kind person. Real kindness does not mean letting people do whatever they want. And calmness does not mean you have no boundaries. An emotionally mature person can still speak gently, can still listen, can still act with kindness. But when something crosses a line, they know how to speak clearly. Not to hurt anyone, but to stop hurting themselves. And that is a very important difference, because many people live kindly, but quietly tolerate too much. They are afraid that if they speak up, others will feel hurt. They are afraid that if they set boundaries, others will think they are selfish. They are afraid that if they stop giving in, the relationship will change. And because of that, they stay silent. They keep saying, "It's okay." They keep trying to keep everything peaceful. Until one day, the kindness inside them begins to turn into exhaustion. And that is no longer healthy kindness. Calm people do not choose that path. They still keep their kindness, but they do not forget their self-respect. They still care about other people's feelings, but they do not dismiss their own feelings either. They still want to keep the peace, but not by losing their inner peace. The Stoics understood that living rightly is not about pleasing everyone. It is about staying honest in the way you behave. You can be kind and still say no. You can stay calm and still leave a conversation that is no longer healthy. You can respect others and still refuse to accept disrespectful treatment. That is not a contradiction. That is maturity. Because the most beautiful kindness is not the kind that leaves you exhausted. It is kindness that still keeps its self-respect. And the strongest calmness is not silently tolerating everything. It is knowing how to protect your peace without allowing your heart to become bitter. So when someone disrespects you, remember this: you do not need to respond with hurt, but you also do not need to accept what hurts you. You do not need to become harsh, but you also do not need to make yourself smaller. You only need to be calm enough to clearly say what does not work for you. Grounded enough to keep your boundaries, and kind enough not to turn your pain into the way you treat other people. When you look back at all these things, you begin to realize dealing with disrespect is not about learning to become colder, and it is not about finding a response that hurts the other person more. It is about learning how to stay true to yourself in the moments when your emotions could so easily turn you into someone else. When someone disrespects you, the first reaction most people have is wanting to respond back, wanting to say something, wanting to prove a point, wanting to make the other person understand that you do not deserve to be treated that way. And that is completely normal, because everyone has self-respect. Everyone wants to be treated with kindness. Everyone wants to feel that they are being seen fairly. But people who are truly emotionally mature slowly begin to understand this. Not every reaction makes you stronger. Some reactions only make you more tired. Some words only make everything heavier. And some arguments
even if you win with words, can still cost you your inner peace. That is why calmness matters so much. Not because you do not feel pain, not because you do not feel anger, not because you have nothing to say, but because you understand that one moment of disrespect should not have the power to decide who you become. You can be hurt without becoming bitter. You can disagree without becoming harsh. You can set boundaries without hurting someone just to prove you are strong. The Stoics understood this deeply. Real strength does not come from controlling others. It comes from staying in control of yourself, even when someone else is not in control of themselves. You cannot decide what other people will say. You cannot decide whether they will understand you. You cannot decide whether they will treat you with respect. But you can decide whether you will respond from calmness or from hurt. You can decide whether you will say what needs to be said or say something you will later regret. You can decide whether you will keep your dignity or allow someone else's emotions to pull you away from who you truly are. And that is where maturity begins. Not in never being affected, but in knowing how to pause before reacting. Not in always staying silent, but in knowing when to speak clearly. Not in always winning, but in keeping your calm, even when someone else does not see things your way. So the next time someone disrespects you, remember this: you do not need to lose yourself just to respond to one unkind moment. You do not need to become colder just because you have been hurt. You do not need to make anyone feel small just to prove that you have value. You only need to be calm enough not to react in a way you will later regret. Clear enough to know what you will not accept. Grounded enough not to turn every hurtful word into self-doubt. And kind enough that even after being hurt, you still do not allow that pain to turn you into someone bitter. That is real strength. The strength of someone who knows how to protect their peace, who knows how to keep their self-respect, and who still chooses to live with kindness, even when life does not always treat them with kindness.
If this video resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. This channel is not about becoming a colder person, and it is not about learning how to win every argument. It is about learning together how to live with more calm, more clarity, more kindness, and more steadiness, even when other people do not treat us with respect. If you remember only one thing today, remember this: you do not need to lose your calm just because someone else cannot keep theirs. You do not need to say things you will later regret just to protect your self-respect in one moment. And you do not need to become bitter just because someone once hurt you. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not to respond quickly. It is to pause for a moment, keep your heart calm, and choose a response that you can still respect yourself for later. And before you leave, I want to ask you something. When someone disrespects you, what helps you keep your calm? Is it self-control? Is it self-respect? Or is it because you do not want to lose yourself inside someone else's emotions? Leave your thoughts below. I truly want to hear your perspective. See you in the next video.